Joe talks about Joe. And now, your host, Joe Slepsky.
Hello again, everybody. It's me, your host, Joe Slepsky, and welcome back to Joe on Joe. This is the only podcast where I've covered every episode of the Sunbow cartoon, DIC, even G.I. Joe Extreme, and every issue of the Marvel Real American Hero comic book, page by page, panel by panel. Now, last week, again, it was just the most special episode. My mother was the guest star, and listeners, you did not disappoint. I heard from so many of you, some new, some old, all friends now. You guys reached out and told me how much you were in absolute love with my mom. And I got to be honest, I can't blame you. She is adorable. I need all of you to know that I shared all of those missives with her. It made her week just a complete love fest for Mary Lynn. And I can't say thank you enough to you guys. But thank you to my mom again for stepping out and joining me on the show. It was just a special episode, and your reactions made it all the more so. So once again, thank you to listeners. Thank you to Mary Lynn. It was just a great episode. We've got another great episode of You on Joe this week as well. Don't go away, because this is You on Joe. Now, this is all about you, listeners. You guys love G.I. Joe. Whatever you love the best. Is it the toys? Is it the cartoon? Is it the comic book? Whatever you love the best about G.I. Joe, I want to have you on this show to talk about it. So reach out. Give me a holler on social media. Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Joe on Joe Pod. You can send me an email to joeonjoepod@gmail.com. Anyway, reach out. It's real easy to connect. We'll do it all online, and we'll get you on this episode. And I want to hear what your favorite thing is about G.I. Joe. And while you're online, you're on your phones, please check out your podcast app and give us a rate and review. Every review helps grow the show, gets more people listening. Hey, I hope for 5 stars, but 4 is good too. 1, maybe not. But, I appreciate all of you. You're also, if you're inclined, you can visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/JoeandJoePod. And that helps keep the show running, as well as our wonderful sponsors you're going to hear from right now, the Movies in a Meal podcast. In the beginning of time, the smallest organism gained sentience and thought to itself, I really need a good meal. Then, a bunch of other stuff happened, and finally the Lumiere brothers started showing movies in France. This was all the inspiration that fellow broadcasters Brad, Keith, and Ben needed to combine these two primal needs into the Movies in a Meal podcast. The Movies in a Meal is one of the most casual and relaxing film talk podcasts you could ever listen to. These 3 friends enjoy a good meal together while talking all about the movies. And not just reviews. They do favorite lists, comparison discussions, genre talks, anything and everything that you can think of. They've even broken their solemn promise inherent in the name and branched out into TV talk. So I love the variety of films they bring to the table. They cover new releases, classics, cult films, often in one episode. It's really a delight to listen to, and it has something for every movie fan out there to enjoy. So if you're looking to grow your podcast library, if you eat meals, and if you've ever seen a movie, then you should give Ben, Keith, and Brad a listen and subscribe to the Movies in a Meal podcast. They've been a great sponsor to this show. I love the Movies in a Meal podcast, and I'd like all of you to love them too. So this week's episode is if you saw the title of it, Star Wars versus G.I. Joe, it's not much of a discussion, right? One of them is a worldwide juggernaut that's influenced and shaped the lives of young people all over the globe. And the other one, it gave us Book of Boba Fett. I'm totally kidding. Star Wars it's that 1,000-pound elephant in the room, right? When it comes to talking toys, Star Wars is the big enchilada, right? It kicked off so much of this, the 3 3/4 inch scale. Star Wars is where it started, right? So when this week's guest, our new friend Blaine Gingerich, reached out and said that he wanted to compare Star Wars and G.I. Joe, I was very skeptical. I didn't think we could, what could we really do on this that would remotely be competitive? Because, I love G.I. Joe. I want to be positive about G.I. Joe. I want to celebrate everything about G.I. Joe. I don't want to just be like, yeah, Star Wars is huge and G.I. Joe, we're always struggling, blah, 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 blah. But at the same time, I want to be authentic. I want to be honest with you, listeners. So at the surface, Star Wars, warts and all, it takes up all the oxygen in any room, right? So I put a lot of thought into it, and together with Blaine, we worked up 10 specific categories of comparison. Kind of like look at the trees for the forest, if you will. And I was absolutely surprised by the results of this conversation today. No spoilers for you guys, but we ended up having a really robust conversation on both sides of the toy aisle about these two passions of many of our lives. I know it was one of mine, listeners. I know it was one of yours. So whether you agree or disagree with our outcomes today, I hope that you enjoy the paths that we take to reach our conclusions. I really want to thank Blaine for stepping up and joining the Joe on Joe universe. So put on your thinking caps and let's compare G.I. Joe versus Star Wars with guest Blaine Gingerich.
My friend Steve just texted me because I'm building a flag, a lower piece for the flag, and he was going to help me, but my actual my builder friend who actually builds houses helped me instead. So it worked out pretty well for me.
Fun. So how did your friend who builds houses help you build a piece for the flag? Is it
we built a lower deck. I don't know if you've seen anybody that raises the decks on the flag.
Mm-hmm.
And we built the entire lower part for it yesterday. And I can text it to you if you're interested.
Oh no, that's fabulous, man. That's really great. Okay. So how long have you had the flag?
I've had the flag for like 2 weeks.
Oh,
so I just got it.
So that's so exciting. I'm not going to ask you what you paid for it. However, I will say, all right. No, that's gauche. What I will say though, is that something you really wanted when you were a kid, or is it something that because when I was younger, I saw the flag and I was like, it's too big. I would love it, but I literally didn't have room for it. So that I remember telling my mother specifically, no, that's way too much.
Yeah, I just texted it to you, but yeah, I don't remember wanting it as a kid, but it's one of those things that I always thought was cool. I knew about it. I just didn't ever actually see one in person.
Yeah. I've really only been in the presence of one like 3 or 4 times in my life. Like fully.
So I really didn't know what I was getting into at first, but then I joined some of the G.I. Joe groups on Facebook, and I had been looking, just looking around on there, and then my friend Steve, he always had the G.I. Joe stuff, and I had the Star Wars stuff.
Shout out to Steve.
Yeah, and I had asked him when my boys were younger if he would sell me his stuff, because I knew he still had all this stuff, and he was kind of a hoarder. He keeps everything, and so I had asked him like, "Hey, would you sell me your stuff?" And then he's like, "Yeah, I'll get around to it," but he never got around to it. And then I hadn't talked to him for a couple of years, and then I sent him a message probably 3 months ago and said, "Hey, you ready to sell that stuff yet?" And he goes, actually, I do need some money for a motorcycle transmission. So yes, I will sell it to you. So that got me and my daughter started. And now my boys are grown. They don't care to play. And now, but my daughter who's 14 still likes to, she's more of like a collector person than, we don't really get down and play with them much, but one
of the kids always picks up that gene. Yeah, they really
she's
do.
More of a collector type person.
I wonder if like sociologically, that's just because you watch the way other people. I don't mean this in a negative way towards how other people play or collect or whatever, but there must be something about your observation of the world where you see stuff and you go, "Oh, I just want to keep that," or collect all, or either keep it nice, or which is fine, but like just get all of them.
Right.
And it doesn't affect everyone in the family. It's just like the one person. Sometimes, sometimes. But
because I have 4 kids and they're all very different from each other.
Yeah. That's so wild. That's really neat. Well, I'm really excited today, and make sure Steve hears this, because we are talking about, you briefly mentioned it, Star Wars versus G.I. Joe. Now, caveat, neither of us, I think, are what we would call, textbook experts on the subjects. Right. Do you think?
No, not an expert, no. But I've been, with the toy. I was probably an expert on the toys on the Star Wars stuff back in the day.
Oh,
Back
for
in the,
sure. Yeah, for
yeah,
sure. And for I think and it's such an expansive conversation because it really is. For the
yeah,
purposes of not sounding foolish, I think we need to cover the fact that obviously Star Wars is a bigger brand.
right, yeah,
There's no doubt in that mind. So in order to keep this conversation kind of frankly a little more worth all of our times, because it's a real Star Wars G.I. Joe. Well, yes, Star Wars is I we had
yeah,
you and I we were talking the other day, and let's break it down into some specific categories, about the toy line, and we're gonna lead toy first, but we're gonna touch on all the other stuff, right? So
sure,
coming at it from a toyetic perspective, we're gonna go through some categories here. I've got a scorecard, very much like the Snake Eyes kill count. I've got a scorecard. We're gonna assign a winner in each of 10 categories, and when we get to the 10th, we're gonna tally them up. And quite frankly, I'm sure Star Wars is gonna win, but I do think we are all gonna be very surprised in some areas that I think G.I. Joe has it on Star Wars.
okay,
Are you excited for this, Blaine?
yes,
Awesome. And listeners, Blaine's calling from, let me get this right, Couts, Indiana?
yes, yep,
I
that's
pronounced
right,
it
yes.
right? Awesome.
Yep, you're right. Yep.
Couts, Indiana is just outside of El Preso. You're an owner-operator truck driver. Been doing that for 27 some years. And
Yep.
and I was excited when you reached out on social to say you wanted to participate in the show. That means a lot, and I think that's what makes all this stuff fun to do. So I'm excited to get you on there. And if listeners, as you fall in love with Blaine, you're going to want to find him on Instagram and social Twitter. It's at Blaine Gingerich. So BLAINE Gingerich, GINGERICH. So like Ginger Itch.
Yeah, I don't really share much Joe stuff on.
Well, now you
I
got.
don't think I've actually put anything on Instagram.
Well, you should
so
start doing it now. You're gonna.
well,
get some
maybe
fun.
it's kind of embarrassing. It's cool, but it's one of those things like all my like truck driver friends like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
What I mean?
No, I hear you. Listen, I hear you. I've learned a few years back. I just said I'm owning this, like absolutely
Did you?
owning this. Like this.
Yeah,
This
I
is
probably
what I
ought
did.
to. I mean, yeah, it's and it depends on the age of people, that
Right.
what they think about it, and some like the guy that helped me build the lower deck for the flag yesterday. I was shocked when he thought it was cool. And he's like, "Yeah, I'll help you build it." I'm like, "Oh, really?" I'm like, "That's great." I couldn't get to his house quick enough.
Listen,
so.
everyone spends their life trying to recapture their youth, and we recapture 3 3/4 inches at a time. We're like the opposite of we're like slow and the not so furious. We live our life 3 3/4 inches at a time.
Right.
That's what we are. Awesome. So Blaine, let's get into this. So G.I. Joe versus Star Wars, and we're again approaching for toyetics online. I thought the first category we should hit is general tenure. Now, we are going to focus on the original run, right? So I'm not gonna. This show typically only really does focus on that first run, right? From like 82 to 94, 95.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
That's my favorite.
Yeah. Me too. So
yeah,
for the purposes of this, we're talking about that run of G.I. Joe, and we're also talking about really the 77 or 78 through 84, 85 run of Star Wars, because Star Wars would stopped in 85 or 86, right? A little bit after Jedi.
Right. Yeah.
And
I have A-Wing fighter from Droids series, so I don't know what year that. I think that was like 86, maybe.
Exactly.
I could look on the back of it. It's right in the back wall.
Right, and so and they didn't pick up again until 1995 with Power of the Force. So,
right.
So that's that first 10 years is really what we're talking about as far as this conversation.
Yeah.
So let's talk about it briefly, or just to start the literal number of years. So G.I. Joe 82. Now the last run of Joe's ran through 94, but technically we know they were on the shelves till 95. But we'll say 94, right? Just for argument's sake.
Okay.
So that's 12 years. Star Wars 78 to 86. How many is that?
Don't test my math.
8 years.
8. Right.
Years.
Yeah.
8 years.
Right.
G.I. Joe beats Star Wars on tenure, on original, OG G.I. Joe beats Star Wars for tenure of the line.
Okay.
I never thought I would find a way to have G.I. Joe beat Star Wars for tenure, but it absolutely beat Star Wars for tenure.
It did then.
It
right,
did.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it
right.
did. Between 86 and there's later on, we're going to get into some of the other media parts, so I don't want to dig too into this. But between 86 and 95, there was not a lot of Star Wars, period. There weren't any more movies. All the cartoons were done. The Timothy Zahn's Heir to the Empire novels, which are amazing, were the first novels, first fresh Star Wars product in like 5 years. And that came out, I want to say 91 or 92. So there was nothing for Star Wars during those years. So really,
so maybe that's why G.I. Joe, why I got more into G.I. Joe then, maybe.
It certainly took over the toy aisle, as after Jedi. Jedi was 83, so as Jedi waned, and you mentioned the droid toys. Those are super expensive because there were very few made.
Yeah,
the Ewoks and the droid stuff. The quantities of those toys that were pumped out were just not remotely close to what were being pumped out while the movies were supporting the toys. Yeah. So the toy line itself really died a death about 3 years after Jedi, or 2 years after Jedi, 3 or 2 years after Jedi, however you look at it. So, tenure, Yo Joe, right?
Right, yeah. Yeah, it looks like we'll give that one to Joe.
Yeah, that's a win for G.I. Joe. Now, let's talk about the number of figures. Now, this could be a numerical thing, which G.I. Joe wins, right?
Right, yeah.
Hundreds of characters, of including versions of characters. So I know there's a lot of duplicates.
If you include repaints and stuff.
Right.
Yeah,
there's a lot of that.
Crazy.
But Star Wars also had 4 to 5 Lukes. There were Han Solo's, Leia. Yeah, the breadth of G.I. Joe characters wildly more diverse than Star Wars characters.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, for sure.
Like, what's your most obscure G.I. Joe character that you have a toy of that you really enjoy?
Most obscure.
Or one of your favorites.
Well, the most obscure I can think of is that Globulus guy, and I can't stand him. I refuse to buy it. That's the one every time I see him, I'm like, no, we're not getting it. Now my daughter teases me about it. So I'm going to get you a Globulus. I'm like, no, I don't want any part of that.
I actually want a Globulus.
You do? Oh, well, you can probably get one.
Yeah, I was eyeing him up recently. I think I'm going to
really? I don't know. Just that for some reason, if you want to try to go back and watch the G.I. Joe movie, as soon as he shows up, it's like, I can't watch. I have to stop watching for some reason. So I don't know.
It might be my lingering love for Mickey, from the Rocky movies, Burgess Meredith in general, between the Penguin, Mickey.
Oh, okay.
Grumpy old men, and then the man who has everything on the Twilight Zone, like that. I was
more into the comics, and I don't think did he show up in the comic? Yeah, I didn't think so. So yeah, none of the Cobra-La stuff was in there.
No,
I don't have a full run of the comics, but I subscribed to the comic over and over. Remember every year be like, oh, it's time to renew again, and now the price has gone up. You know, and I remember that. But
and I'll say this: while Star Wars, obviously, now since then, and again, we're focusing on the original line. Since then, Star Wars, I believe, has left G.I. Joe in the dust. They have mined every scene and every back character and every alien has gotten some form of action figure. So I get it.
Yeah.
Bigger picture, Star Wars beats it, and there's a bit more backstory. But again, we're focusing on the early days.
Right.
While they certainly did a wide number of aliens, the Walrus Man and Greedo and you can go down the line. All the Ewoks, all the random cartoon characters, from the Ewok show and from droids and all that stuff. And they certainly gave Star Wars fans a lot of fodder to enjoy.
Right.
It was nowhere the variety that G.I. Joe gave. Fresh concepts, especially with fresh concepts. They were simply translating what was on the screen.
Yeah.
And G.I. Joe was coming up with 18 different kinds of Vipers. Here's a bunch every year they were saying, here's 12, 13 new Joes, and here's 8 or 10 new Cobra guys every year for 12 years.
Right.
That's a lot. And
Yeah.
and every vehicle gets their own driver, right?
Oh, you're right. Yeah.
Star Wars vehicles, if you recall,
Yeah. They do a lot of that with the drivers.
Star Wars.
Like A-wing fighter pilot,
Yeah,
B-wing
I'm
fighter
sorry.
pilots.
You're right. You're right. In later years, they did. Yeah. They did.
Right, yeah.
But X-wing,
Yeah, X-wing and Y-wing were the same pilot. Yeah.
Well, it was and the X-wing didn't come with a Luke.
Right, yeah. No, they didn't ever come with figures.
Right. They
yeah.
didn't. Right.
No.
Exactly. They didn't come with the figures. They weren't packaged in there.
Right. Oh, I'm sorry. I misunderstood what you.
But I think you're right though. I do believe the A-wing pilot was in the A-wing box. I do believe.
Yeah, the A-wing pilot came with the droids one anyway.
Oh, right.
Yeah, right. That's the one I got.
And I would say the fact that we're even kind of like figuring this out is sheer proof that G.I. Joe has a beat for the number and variety of figures. Because from the get,
for sure.
The get,
I think isn't there only like 86 characters or something from G.I. Joe from Star Wars?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. And from the jump, they said, "Here's a mobile missile system. Oh, and by the way, here's Hawk." They're not even waiting. They're like, "Here's a toy, and that toy needs a driver. Here's a HISS tank, and that HISS tank needs a driver."
Yeah,
like G.I. Joe wasn't fooling around.
Right.
So,
and I really liked G.I. Joe as a kid. But my parents and I was Mennonite at the time, and so they liked they could get behind maybe the Star Wars stuff. It's just pretend,
sure.
But G.I. Joe was too military, so they did not want me to get into G.I. Joe or join the military. So that was kind of the
completely understandable. Completely understandable. Yeah, absolutely. I totally get that. It's a lot. Although, a smart aleck Mennonite kid would have been like, they both shoot lasers.
Right. Yeah, for sure. They did both shoot lasers, but actually the kill count was way higher in Star Wars than G.I. Joe.
G.I. Joe's got parachutes in every vehicle.
Right. Yeah. No one dies. Then the argument to that was like, well, that is so ridiculous. You're going to think, you go to war and you're fine afterwards.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, but then you just show them that scene in Return of the Jedi where the Ewok, who we don't know his name or her name, dies in the forest, and there's not a dry eye in the house.
Yeah, it kills them. Yeah.
Yeah. I recently I love, and for the record, everyone, I love Star Wars. So this is not me slamming. I absolutely adore Star Wars. We saw Jedi in the theater recently, and I just adore that movie. And that scene came on, and it hit me again. It just hit me, and I'm like, oh, that is so sad. We don't even know.
Right, yeah.
It's not even like that was Wicket, like we met him, spent time with him.
Ewok, right.
No, just a random Ewok, and we see him die, and you're like, oh, no.
Right, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So I'm going to say, for number and breadth of figures, G.I. Joe.
Right, yeah. I think they have the upper hand on that.
Now, we're going to go into packaging next, and I'm going to throw a quick caveat here that I am not going to talk about, or I don't think we should talk about, I think it's an unfair fight to talk about accessories. Because Star Wars...
Joe would wipe them out.
Exactly. And Star Wars was the first, right? So they were breaking so much new ground, like give, adding one lightsaber, and they're like, oh my God, it comes with an accessory, versus in later line G.I. Joe, here's a whole punch card of plastic guns that can pop out,
which makes it impossible to be completionist,
right?
Because all this stuff you got to have
and they're like, oh, the one tiny microphone is missing, you're not complete. Oh God,
right?
Yeah,
yep. So Firefly's handheld mic,
totally. So we're gonna set that. We're not even gonna, because that's a kind of a not fair fight, because Star Wars was the OG daddy. It's like when you talk about Star Wars movies. Actually, this whole conversation is like talking about Star Wars movies, where for me, Empire is my favorite. I think it's also the best, but you can't get Empire without Star Wars.
Right.
I
actually think Rogue One is the best.
Oh,
but,
great. That's also, fabulous.
Yeah.
A very common opinion too. Yeah. 100%.
Right.
So, but then you go, oh, but Star Wars started it all. A New Hope started it all.
It did start it all.
Yeah.
I actually started with Empire though. That was the first one I saw.
Oh,
yeah,
really?
I did.
Were you confused at all by anything?
I was very, but I remember we went to my dad owns a trucking company, and we went to his insurance guy's house for some reason, and his son and I went to the theater to see Empire Strikes Back, and I was like blown away. So I started late, and then I remember I saw the first one at home because my cousins had a VCR and we did not have a VCR. No, that wasn't it. It wasn't a VCR. No, it was. They had it on HBO. We saw Star Wars on HBO at their house.
Awesome.
Yeah, so that was that was pretty cool.
Awesome.
It sticks in my mind, and I was pretty young at the time, obviously.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So the next category, though, so we're going to move to packaging. Now, this is going to be tough. This is really going to be a debate, and I don't know which side of the fence, to be honest, I'm going to fall on, Blaine. So
Yeah.
So let's dig into it. And we're talking about the carded stuff. Although vehicles, we could bring that into play too, but the carded stuff really. The Star Wars cards are fabulous. The all black, Starfield with the silver Star Wars. The name is there. The name extends to envelop the whole card. You then get a picture of the guy or character from the movie. You get their name prominently under the Star Wars title. And then there they are on the left side of the bubble, right?
Yeah.
G.I. Joe cards, also fabulous. G.I. Joe emblazoned across the top, obviously.
Yeah.
The figure has flipped now to the right side of the card, generally. Or pretty much all the time, but sometimes they would extend a little further.
Yeah.
So the character's flipped on the other side. So I feel like that was a conscious marketing decision on their part,
Oh, maybe, yeah. I don't have any carded Star Wars stuff, so yeah, I don't. I'd have to look it up.
Oh yeah, I'm googling.
The only card I can think of when you're talking about a card is the Crimson or a Royal Imperial Guard. That's the one I'm thinking of. Is the packaging that came in?
Oh, for sure.
Right.
Yeah, and then G.I. Joe's got the logo emblazoned across the top. Now underneath it, G.I. Joe, they were smart enough to add Cobra the enemy, Cobra enemy. Underneath it to let you know that yes, it's a part of G.I. Joe, but this is a bad guy. Star Wars didn't do anything like that. Star Wars was just straight up Star Wars.
Yeah.
So it was. They would certainly have the name on it, Imperial, whatever, but it wouldn't necessarily say good guy, bad guy.
Right.
They then where Star Wars used portrait art, probably. I think 100% of the time until they start maybe the later lines they started using, it would have been cartoon art. It would have been art from the cartoon.
On droids, on droids they had cartoon stuff.
G.I. Joe was all that beautiful Hector Garrido art with that trademark backblast. I would argue that the backblast is the equivalent of the Star Wars silver ring around the card. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would. If we're selecting a winner on this, in my opinion, I would go with G.I. Joe. I think the back, I think the card, the art looked cooler. I think it's kind of a cheat to just have a picture from a still from the movie,
right?
That's kind of, I guess. I mean, I don't know. I think carded G.I. Joe stuff looks cooler than carded Star Wars.
I agree with you. I 100% agree with you.
Okay.
And this came up. This part of this inspiration is this did come up on another recent episode, and that's kind of where we landed too. I do think G.I. Joe has stood the test of time better. I think for all those little reasons, G.I. Joe cards had the file cards on the back. They both had, they both had the catalog on the back, tell you what other figures to get.
Right.
But G.I. Joe had the flag points. G.I. Joe had the card on the back.
Right.
G.I. Joe had not only the name of the character, but also like what they did. Star Wars wasn't like it just said Darth Vader, didn't say Dark Lord of the Sith. It said Boba Fett. It didn't say Bounty Hunter. It just said their name. So the G.I. Joe card gave you more to play with, even if you weren't 100% familiar with who you were dealing with.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Having said that,
I have a quick. I can remember. I once was peeking for presents for my. For my birthday, and it was before Jedi came out, and I found the Biker Scout in the packaging still in my mom's closet, and I was like, whoa, who is this guy? And so
awesome.
But there was nothing. It didn't tell you anything about the person on there. You had no idea what it was. So,
and that toy, by the way, that singular toy though, the Biker Scout with the exploding speeder bike was fabulous.
Yeah,
I had two of
that
those,
was cool, and I still have my original Biker Scouts yet.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
I will say this though, and this is part of the Star Wars card that I think, unfortunately, it worked against them in a way, where GI Joe was always GI Joe. The logo changed, tweaked a little bit here and there, but it was always pretty much the same logo on everything for the entire 12 years we're talking about. Star Wars went from Star Wars to Empire Strikes Back to Return of the Jedi. So they kind of self-dated themselves by doing that. I think in a good way and a bad way. Because in a good way, it associates you with that specific adventure and that specific movie. And and that's great for kids to get like that repetitive identification line. But then it also dates it, because in the moment, we're looking back, reflecting on it as a classic time. In the moment, you go, "Oh, Empire Strikes Back, that's the old movie. The new movie's Return of the Jedi. I don't want to get at that Empire Strikes Back." Where G.I. Joe, those characters, you would only know they were, quote, old if you really knew every character. You wouldn't know they were old just because they were sitting, like if there's a Zap sitting on a peg, next to a shipwreck. You wouldn't know necessarily that Zap was older based on the front of the package, at least. You would have to really do some sleuthing to go, "Oh wait, this guy came out 2 years ago. I don't want him. I want the new guy."
Yeah.
So while
I can't remember. I can remember that. Did they continue making Zaps like for like the whole run, or did they just make them?
Most of these figures, especially like the versions of the figure, they would do updated versions of the characters, but most of the actual runs, even the really popular ones, they only manufacture them for like 2 years or even one or 2 years.
So the likelihood of them being on the peg still is probably not real good, right?
Well, it would have been at the time, because if they came out in 82 and they were you remember 82, 83, 84, the toy stores were stuffed with them. They had a lot of these figures to make. They reissued the first crew. They reissued with different swivel joints, right?
With the swivels, right?
Yeah. So that's a whole nother row of them. And then each year they would pump them out. So there would be a mix in there, not necessarily, because I absolutely remember seeing exactly that. Seeing the green shirts next to the more flavorful guys, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But it was all about inventory. It was all about, they would diminish because the new cases didn't have the old guys in it.
Right.
But I'm sure they would sell through. So yeah, I think you're right. I think we give the packaging to G.I. Joe. So right now, ladies and gentlemen, G.I. Joe is up 3-0 to Star Wars.
Oh man. Oh boy.
Shocking, right?
Yeah.
Shocking. Now, the next area is figure construction. Again, another handicap here, because G.I. Joe has, 4 or 5 years of learning from the Star Wars figures to get into
having a couple figures to compare.
Yeah, as far as like building, at the time, building these new tiny action figures, which Star Wars broke the mold on. And so G.I. Joe has a bit of an advantage. So I think we need to give it that kind of handicap. And then with Star Wars, once they locked into the version of it, I think they were smart not to do it, to not change it. One, for expense, all the tooling and all the dies were made to make those specific kinds of, what's it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points of articulation, right? The neck, the arms.
Right, yeah, the heads turn, that's about it. The heads turn and the arms go up and down.
Right. So
so
you don't want, even if, let's just say in a world where they were like, holy cow, G.I. Joe's doing these O-ring stuff, let's do Return of the Jedi as O-ring figures. Let's just live in that world. You would then have all these O-ring looking Jedi figures that wouldn't match up with the Star Wars figures.
Right. And, they had a chance to redo them, for Power of the Force when, Hasbro got the G.I. Joe license.
In 95?
In 95, and they didn't they didn't do anything except make them buff.
Well, they were huge. They were He-Mans.
Right, yeah. So I have quite a few of those.
Yeah, they were absolutely He-Man. Well, by that point, I think
made them buff, no more articulation.
Well, O-rings were de rigueur at the time, right? So most of the action figures had gone to. I'm thinking of stuff like the superhero action figures, Extreme Justice. Okay. Remember those from like 96 and stuff, where they had moved
I don't remember those.
Oh, well, they like the hard plastic of GI Joe they'd gotten away from that. So action figures in general were a little more of the softer plastic, very much like, not a scientist, so I don't know what the type is, but like Star Wars is softer.
Okay.
Right. So you don't have thumbs breaking on Star Wars.
Right. Yeah.
But you also then don't get, I think you don't get a lot of the intricate details, although they're not bad, not to knock on them, but you don't get a lot of intricate details that you get with the harder GI Joe.
Right.
Certainly, obviously, with the joints, there's less posability.
Less posability, but they were way more durable.
Yes.
You know,
and that's, yep. They were absolutely way more durable. And they were, using your conversation with your parents, Star Wars, I think, was aimed a little younger, you know, than G.I. Joe. I believe, you know, versus, you know, a space fantasy with, you know, lasers versus military dudes. Tends to skew a little older. So Star Wars had to reach both a real young audience and a you know, and the teen audience as well.
Right. Yeah.
So with that in mind, I think it was smart for them to stick with that, you know, softer, more pliable thing. Now, they found ways, Star Wars really found some very inventive ways to get the characters to interact with their vehicles, even though they weren't, you know, they weren't jointed like G.I. Joe, right? You could have a G.I. Joe guy hang off the edge of an Ostriker, you know, where they had,
right, yeah.
Now they both had pegs in their feet, so that was a win, and that would be
different sizes.
Yeah, but that would be a Star Wars invention,
right?
But like, I'm thinking specifically of the Tauntaun.
Okay.
That they literally they built a hatch in the not belly, but the
back
back of
for
the
his
Tauntaun.
feet to go in.
Yeah. So you get Luke to ride the Tauntaun, even though the figure itself, or anyone really, the figure itself was never going to be able to ride the Tauntaun.
Right. And like the speeder bike had that thing you'd pull up, you know, and slide his feet under.
Yep.
So the biker scout could stay on.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Right. You know, the TIE Fighter hatch, going back to the OG stuff, you know, it was like a little elevator. You would pull the seat up to put your guy in and then pop it back down, you know.
You didn't have to use the elevator though. It's still.
Oh no, it would just fall in there. But it was It was neat. I always thought it was neat. You know, the Millennium Falcon with the ramps to get up, all the pegs inside, you could pose them in nice places. Right. I had the cantina with the cardboard backdrop, and the cantina had slidable levers so that you could literally put them in play. That's something G.I. Joe never had. Right. Yeah. You know, I can't think of a G.I. Joe toy that had movable levers.
Movable levers. Sure. Yeah. But what about the Moray? You know, you get to push the button and the missiles pop up.
No, that's yes, but not what I'm referring to. Where you put the figure on a peg, and then you can reenact scenes without touching the toy.
Okay.
So they were.
I got you.
Yeah, so they were emulating, you know, the Force, right? So on Dagobah.
Oh, the Dagobah thing. Yeah,
it had the little pegs that would lift the rocks and
the rocks. I didn't actually own the Dagobah thing, so I didn't have. I didn't have that one.
And a lot of them had the little sliders, so you could reenact lightsaber battles. That was the idea there.
Oh, okay.
To get two characters clashing their swords.
Oh, well, I do have the snow thing with the swivel thing with the probe droid.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I have that over here, but it's got the thing where you can move that probe droid, you know, and try to get the camera right.
Oh, but great. Yeah. Oh, that looks really good.
Yeah, but yeah, he's down there, and you can move that around, make him pop the probe droid off.
Awesome. And like, while the Joes had the APC, you were just showing us the AT-AT where you could store some of your figures. Yeah, you know, the APC was cool, but that AT-AT is dope.
Oh yeah,
I love the APC, cool. But that AT-AT is awesome.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, I got a ton of stuff here, but the AT-AT was like and I still have my original AT-AT, so that's cool. I have a Power of the Force one also, but that's
fun. Yeah. Listeners, we're on camera, and Blaine really does have a great collection here. They look in fabulous condition, and he's got a lot of. I see some Power of the Force Star Wars carded stuff, and
and this is my.
That's awesome. Is that a
blue?
Is that a blue?
No, there we go. That's an original Imperial shuttle.
The shuttle Tidarium, yes.
Yeah, that's
Oh, it's great. And
right.
he's got a great selection of Joe stuff too.
Oh yeah, I actually have gotten more Joe stuff now than I have of Star Wars. I've gone a little crazy on
That's so good. So
Joe stuff lately. so,
so I think
and it's coming from the flag, the deck of the flag is what we're
that's a good looking flag, man. Is it
yeah.
is it in pretty good shape too?
Yeah, it's in really good shape.
Oh
Yeah,
man,
it's
congratulations.
that's
That's fantastic. You should I know you said you don't do a lot of Joe stuff on your Instagram. You should share a picture of your new flag on Insta.
okay.
That'll
I'll
get
do
everyone
that.
jealous. That'd be great.
Right. Yeah, and that's like the more this
Oh yeah,
came
I
from
love the more. Yeah.
courtesy of
Oh and
Steve. So,
oh, the more is so good.
yeah.
So good.
So yeah.
Awesome. But so setting aside the flexibility, because as we said, I don't think that's a fair fight.
Right.
I think Star Wars toys, as far as what their original purpose was, and in the years they were manufactured, I think Star Wars toys might have a victory here. And I hate to say,
I would say for durability wise, for sure they have Star Wars were better. Just because like I still have most of my original Star Wars toys, and besides like the Millennium Falcon, that was I think that one's a little fragile. Some of the parts in that with the hatches and stuff.
oh yeah, my Falcon eventually got stripped down, and
Right.
it was too beat up for me even to want to look at. So I sold
Yeah.
it.
And a lot of my stuff lasted through my children also.
Yeah.
From me and my kids, and my son Ezra was pretty hard on stuff. So
Yeah.
I'd come downstairs. I'm like, "What have you done?" He just like to take things apart as far as they would go. I'm like, "No,
Well,
don't do that."
It's a good trait for your son.
Right.
I like that
Well,
a lot. Yeah, it's a good trait to have. So I'll
Right.
say this in a real narrow scope, Star Wars wins.
Right. Yeah, I would say durability wise, yeah, Star Wars wins durability for sure.
Awesome. So now it's 3-1 GI Joe. Star Wars is on the board.
Okay.
Now, in the same token, we were talking figures. Let's briefly go into the vehicle construction. We touched on it a little bit.
Sure.
My Star Wars figures were pretty fragile as well as GI Joe. So I mean, I had a lot of
figures.
I'm sorry, the
Vehicles.
Yes.
Vehicles.
Yeah. I had a lot of broken Star Wars vehicles. The X-wing on the X-wing broke off.
Okay.
The part of the arm of the TIE fighter. Well, I think mine the little
Well, they ejected. They eject.
They did, but the little clasps that kept them in
Right.
snapped off. Although
you broke tabs on those?
Yeah, the tabs. That's it. Did you know that
Okay.
that singular piece of the TIE fighter, the little armature thing, is the most produced and biggest longevity designed action figure piece of all time. It has been in use since 1978. They have not stopped making TIE fighters with that same design. It is it is a wonderful design, so I'm not knocking it. But yeah, they have, and I'm sure they've changed some of the manufacturing styles, so they're
probably different, different
plastic
resins, right? Because I'm sure some of the stuff's illegal by now. They've probably changed.
We all have lead poisoning. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But that's still the style they use when they make TIE fighters. So it gets huge points for that, even though mine broke. X-wing broke.
Right.
Falcon had a lot of fragile pieces. The door the blue struts that held the door open just snapped off.
Right. Yes.
The struts on the vehicles that popped down snapped off. Now we were also younger and more brutal with them.
Yeah. Right.
But there was a lot of breakage.
Yeah.
G.I. Joe, a lot of breakage too. I found most of my breakage with G.I. Joe came later. It came as the plastic aged, then everything snapped. When I was a kid, my G.I. Joes didn't break. My Ostriker.
Oh, really?
I tested the shocks on my Ostriker. That thing stayed in great shape. The flag, you got the flag poles and stuff. All those flag poles, all on the stun, the Ostriker, all the pieces of the Terrordrome. My stuff was not breaking. I was older. I was older though.
Right.
What do you think?
Yeah, I didn't have that stuff as a kid. My friend, I got his stuff but maybe he didn't play with it real hard. But most of his stuff isn't broken. So
yeah.
But yeah,
I feel like I mean, so we know that G.I. Joe was a harder, is it just like the figures, they were harder plastic. So there would, I would guess, tendency to crack more, on a bounce. But it's like Star Wars was reaching for all those moving parts, and the reach might have led to some more fragile things, where I don't think G.I. Joe reached for a couple years. Like, they started making the original, if you look at the original vehicles for G.I. Joe, they're all pretty sturdy, right? They're pretty compact. The tank, the HISS tank, the Mobat. Yeah. Like everything's pretty much like, here's an ingrained thing. And then, was it 2 years later, you start getting stuff like the pack rats, which are pretty fragile. Like, those small.
I never had those. So,
yeah. Like things like that didn't hold up. But then you started getting, even like my APC was pretty sturdy, even though that had some, moving parts.
Right.
So I don't know. To be honest, I'm on the fence about this one, because Star Wars as a whole, they were made out of softer materials. They also were getting played with when we were all with younger kids. But G.I. Joe doesn't hold up over the years. So I don't know. Where would you fall on this for the vehicle construction?
Well, I mean, I think the Star Wars vehicles are way simpler, because I just got a whale from the guy I got the flag from, and it's got so many parts that are like so hard to keep in good shape. The veins on the back of the on the back of the boat. That's the worst part. But I don't know. Maybe they were tougher though when we were kids. Yeah. Before the plastic got brittle. I don't know. Well, I had other friends that had them. I don't remember if they held up or not.
So since we're talking narrow view, and we're, that's how we dealt with it with the figures, right? We didn't talk, accessories and all the extra stuff, and also we're talking in that era. So we're talking of the playtime we were playing with them, not as years went by. So like for me, as years went by, my G.I. Joe stuff snapped because they were just the plastic aged.
Right.
I do think the edge goes to Star Wars, and a big part of the reason why is they came as one unit. You didn't have to put them together. Now, I loved putting the G.I. Joe stuff together. I loved it.
Yeah.
But Star Wars, you popped it open, you played with it.
Right. Yeah, it was a lot easier.
Yeah. Like
to assemble.
Yeah. You just went to town on it.
Right.
Versus, G.I. Joe.
I think we had to put the legs on the AT-AT one.
Oh, yeah. I think so. Yeah. Some of the bigger stuff. And like, you had to put the play sets, the pieces together in the play sets.
Right.
But for the most part, you bought your X-Wing, and they both came with stickers, so that's a draw.
Yeah, the stickers. Yeah.
Yep. You applied your X-Wing stickers. Also the Star Wars, I don't know if they were I imagine they were the first, but like Star Wars did the battle damage on the X-Wing. You remember that? They came out with like the damaged X-Wing.
I was not a fan of the battle damage.
Oh, I loved it. I was like, oh, that's
Did
awesome.
you?
Yeah.
Oh, really? Because I thought, you're marring it up. Oh, terrible. That's how I felt about it.
Well, I was a kid. I used to throw pop rocks at my G.I. Joe guys to give them to show some battle damage. The little snap rocks.
I know what they are.
Yeah.
Oh, wait. Not pop rock, but the snap.
Yeah, the snaps. Not pop rocks.
Right.
Pop rocks are what you eat.
Right.
The snappers, the things you would throw and they would explode. Right. Yeah. I would throw them and they would leave little scorch marks on my bases.
Oh.
So it looked great.
Yeah, that would do it.
Yeah.
I was real gentle with my stuff, so I didn't do that much.
I was gentle too. What it did leave though is a lot of tiny little stones in my bedroom, because there's little rocks in there, for it to ignite. So I just had a lot of tiny little pop things, and my mom would just hear pop, 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 and she's like, Joe's playing G.I. Joe. But
the hardest thing on my toys was my mom's vacuum, because she would. We had this blue and black carpet in our living room where I played with all my stuff.
Yeah.
And if you dropped a Star Wars weapon on the ground, it was invisible. I'd have to like lay on with my head on the side, like looking for weapons that would stick up above. You could not see. Yeah. If I would have been thinking, I would have just cut every vacuum bag open before we pitched them, because I could have found many a Star Wars weapon.
You're so right. We had a thick pile rug in the living room. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
We would always stub your. Yeah, I had a tiled bedroom, so I was lucky. Although what's funny is on my tile bedroom, I will never forget this. In fact, last week's episode we spoke with my mother, the great Mary Lynn Slepsky, And I was in my bedroom when we recorded that, and to this day, I still look on the floor for the name stickers from the Star Wars collector's case. I just put them on the floor of my bedroom instead of putting them on the case itself. Yeah. So forever, like Obi-Wan, I would look at the name Obi-Wan Kenobi just in the middle of the floor. They weren't in any order. It was just stuck on the floor. All the names. Yeah. So I think they're finally all cleaned up, some 40 years later. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so cool. I think for the, in that narrow window, for the time, for the purpose, for the simplicity, I think Star Wars wins here. And I know that might get some people that might get some people upset because G.I. Joe has some amazing vehicles. And don't get me wrong, I love them. But I think in this narrow window, I think Star Wars wins. Do you agree?
Man, well, on durability, is that what we're asking?
Yeah, we're talking durability, construction, purpose, like for what it's worth.
Well, I think durability goes to Star Wars for sure, in my opinion. But and as far as like buying, even for how they've lasted from then till now, Star Wars stuff definitely lasted better, in my opinion. Because I've gone through children that have used them. Can we
call this a tie? Because actually,
we can.
Because as I'm thinking about this too, earlier we were talking about breadth of line and depth and stuff, and G.I. Joe branched out a lot more than Star Wars did. G.I. Joe did a lot of like side hustles. I would call things like the Cobra collapsible missile base. The bunker. Like the ammo, the ammo dump, all that stuff, all those tiny little one-off vehicles that they would just not be a part of the main line, but they were there to buy. When Star Wars tried to do that stuff, they failed. Star Wars
have a bunch of ammo dumps.
Yeah, exactly. Star Wars's attempts at doing that did not go well. So I think that's a big plus in the G.I. Joe line. I'm going to give them both a point here. I really am.
Okay.
I think on durability and purpose, Star Wars I think had the edge as far as just design.
I believe so too.
Yeah, but then in the moment, not saying that they as they got older they got brittle. Set that aside. I think just G.I. Joe just went further with the design. So we're gonna go for a tie, and you maybe call me a cop out, but that's what it is. Now this is going to be the shortest conversation.
Okay.
Well. No, yes, it will be. No, this will be a very short one. So I've broken up the media into movies, cartoons, comic books, games, and music. Okay?
Okay.
Movies, Star Wars wins hands down. That's not even a debate.
Yeah.
What's the point of having that conversation? Right. Has yet to do a great movie, and I'm including the cartoon.
Yeah. Right.
So on and so forth. Now, cartoons of the moment. Not necessarily including the modern stuff like the Clone Wars and the
Rebels,
Rebels and all that great stuff they're doing now, because they've done some really good cartoons now. I'm talking about of the era. G.I. Joe wins cartoons, right?
Well, cartoons, yes, because there wasn't a Star Wars cartoon besides the droids.
Well, droids droids. They had the droids cartoon, and Ewoks had a cartoon,
Yeah, and I didn't really like those that well.
They were bad. They were even for kids. And I like cartoon, like I used to watch Smurfs and Snorks and all that stuff. And even with that, I never wanted to watch the Star Wars cartoon. They were not entertaining.
You don't go back and want to watch those at all. But we do watch. We just got the G.I. Joe set, the DVD set.
It's so good.
My daughter and I have been watching those.
It's so good.
If I could stay awake, I work a lot of hours, so I'm always tired when I get done.
Well, cartoons obviously G.I. Joe, because cartoons is the driver first. Also, Star Wars was so intrinsically tied to the movies that there wasn't as big a life outside of, G.I. Joe literally has like multiple continuities based on the different avenues, right? So there is the cartoon continuity, there's the toy continuity, and then there's which we're going to get into next, the comic book continuity.
Right. Yes.
Let alone when you get into like DIC, which is a further continuance of Real American Hero, but like Extreme then is just a whole different story. And then that's past what we're
Yeah.
talking about. You know what I mean? So cartoons, G.I. Joe definitely wins. Comic books, G.I. Joe ran all the way up through the end of the line. Star Wars comic book outlasted the movies by
Right.
like, what is it, like 50 issues, I think.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think Return of the Jedi.
Was it one issue a month?
Yeah, it was monthly. It was a
Okay.
huge, Star Wars was a massive comic book success. Marvel
Really?
produced it. Marvel produced it prior to ever seeing the movie. Howard Chaykin and I think Roy Thomas wrote the first ones. They didn't have this. They only had the script for the movie and some like descriptions of the toys or of the vehicles and stuff. They never saw the movie before they made the actual comic books.
Okay.
So if you look at some of the early stuff, like Darth Vader's green on the front cover, and people look like they look like him, but they kind of don't look like him. And then
Yeah.
after
That's
the
why
movie,
I didn't like the comic. I was way into the movies of Star Wars, so I
okay,
didn't like the comic of Star Wars. I just have a few. I think I still have a few. I remember the one was a giant dinosaur that on the cover,
yeah,
the bones,
right.
I had that one.
Yeah, and for years they sat real dormant on the collector market as far as value goes. They've heated up in the last few years.
Oh, really?
Same thing with G.I. Joe though. G.I. Joe sat dormant and is still less expensive than Star Wars, but has certain issues of G.I. Joe have started to pick up recently. Now this one, I know we were limiting it to at the time. I think we do need to put a little bit of a historical spin on it. So G.I. Joe went 155 issues. Star Wars went 107 or 108, 107, I believe. And it was, they did the Treasury. G.I. Joe did a Treasury, the giant oversized, thing. Star Wars did released multiples of those. They had the Ewoks and they had the Droids comic books.
Oh, I didn't realize they even had those.
Oh yeah. Yeah, Ewoks and Droids. G.I. Joe only had spin-offs. Well, no, G.I. Joe had spin-offs of ongoing-wise special missions. And then they also had the G.I. Joe Transformers crossover, which would be a miniseries. And then the Order of Battle, which would have been a miniseries. If we want to, in this group of... I think we should, since we're talking about published, physical goods. There's obviously the Star Wars novelizations come into play. There's the adaptations of the comics that were reprinted as novels. There was books like Splinter of the Mind's Eye, Han Solo at Star's End, like the Han Solo and Lando spin-off books. But then a lot of those like novelization books, those really stopped after the movies, after Empire Strikes Back. They were produced after Star Wars, and then I think Lucas realized they were telling stories that he didn't want to interfere with his movies. So they stopped making novelizations. Whereas G.I. Joe, they started putting out novels. They started obviously with comic books right away. And then there were, stuff like the Trojan Gambit and, book publications, we'll say. But they didn't get into doing novelizations until like 86, 87. And they did a lot of Choose Your Own Adventure, Find Your Own Fate stuff.
Yeah, I remember Choose Your Own Adventure stuff.
There was a lot of those. I think there were like 20 of those. And then there's also novelizations. I believe about Ballantine books. Then there's like 8. I have all of them. I think there's 6 or 8 of them. So the G.I. Joe also got into the publishing line. Star Wars was a massive comic book hit. I remember the comic book spoiled me for Empire. I read it first, and that's when I learned that Han was Luke's dad. Or that Han was Luke's dad.
Han was Luke's dad. You read a different one than I.
I read a different one. I read the cheap Mexican knockoff. So, yeah, and this is before, and this is of the era. So this is before Dark Horse took over, and Dark Horse has done good stuff with it, but Dark Horse did do good stuff with it, and then it went eventually reverted back to Marvel. Marvel's doing some really good stuff with it now. G.I. Joe died, then went to Dark Horse as well for a couple miniseries, then just went straight dormant, and Star Wars was dormant for a while too. Star Wars went straight dormant, and then it came back with Devil's Due, and then in Image, and then it moved over to IDW. And Star Wars had artists Star Wars had comic strips too. We have to include that here as well. Have you ever read the Star Wars comics?
like
or
I
the
said,
comic strips.
no,
Yeah,
no.
they
Was that in like newspapers or
yeah,
something?
newspapers. Yeah,
Oh,
they've
really?
collected hardcovers of them recently. Yeah, in the last, well, not recently, probably 10 years
Wow,
ago.
yeah, I didn't know about that.
They're
So
really
yeah.
good. Al Williamson. Well, Al Williamson did the artwork on like the movie adaptations, but he did some of the strip stuff too. They're really, really nice. But those weren't driving the continuity of Star Wars,
Okay.
right? G.I. Joe.
I guess I wouldn't know because I didn't think.
G.I. Joe, obviously it was toy driven, so they would be making a new toy,
Right.
and Larry would have to write that character into the toy.
Right.
But that was its own thing, though. So like we have all these memories of these G.I. Joe adventures, the Battle of Springfield, Snake Eyes origin, the Silent Castle, the birth of Serpentor, the assault on the pit, the death of General Flag.
Yeah, I remember the assault on the pit.
Like we can come up with there's these moments, and in the Star Wars comic book continuity, I don't think there were those moments that resonated because they were held back by not having the ability to make major character changes by the movies.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, they never got rid of, G.I. Joe has a lot of characters that were just around forever too, you know. Have you happened to see is it Robot Swim or
Robot Chicken? Yeah, an adult.
Yeah, the one where they go to battle and it's like everyone is just slaughtered like the first day, and it's like over with at the end. And Cobra's like, well, next time I'll get you next time, and they assassinate him instantly, and it's just over with. Have you seen that?
No, I've never seen that.
I'll have to send that to you. It's pretty funny. It would be a really short series if it was.
Oh, that's great. When we started this chapter, I was leaning towards Star Wars, to be honest, because it was a massive. The first comic books were massive. But G.I. Joe was like Marvel's top 5 for like 7 or 8 years.
Really?
Yeah, like the first, probably up to like maybe 5 years. They were G.I. Joe outsold everything. It was up there with Spider-Man and X-Men as far as sales in the 80s. So I think longevity. If we were having this conversation about longevity, I do believe Star Wars wins.
Okay,
I do. And not because of, obviously there's a million more books and novelizations and obviously volume, they absolutely win. But as far as the breadth, like kind of the way Star Wars has explored the universe more, I think Star Wars wins. The way they've expanded it and introduced some characters in the comics that have gone on to the big screen, and just and they've. The value of the books themselves have gone up over the years. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about in the moment. We're talking about in those years when they were vital, right? We're talking 77 to 86 and then 82 to 95, 94, 95. I think G.I. Joe wins here.
Yeah, I mean, I used to go to the drugstore and look at the different comics, and I would flip through Star Wars ones, and I never saw anything I liked in it. I'd buy the G.I. Joe one.
Yeah. And
then I subscribed to them a lot also. So I always subscribed to most of those.
Yeah, this actually is shaping up. This is shaping up differently than I thought it would. Let's talk video games.
Sure.
Are you much of a video game guy?
I used to be pretty big into video games until my son Isaiah started annihilating me whenever we played, because he got so good. He's like ridiculously good at games. And then after I hit about 40, I kind of lost interest in them. I think it's something to do. I'm just too slow.
Right.
On the controls,
Yeah. I think this is a no-brainer. Star Wars wins on video games, and even just in that era that we're talking about.
That era, I just remember the vector graphics Star Wars game, that was awesome.
I was playing that at a barcade last weekend. And,
oh, really?
Up the Death Star. Yeah, it's great. It's a great game. It's so well designed. The speed of it is perfect. It's not too fast. It's not too slow. It's challenging enough. It had the giant cockpit that you could sit in at the arcade.
Oh yeah.
That's amazing.
Not all of them had that, but
Yeah. There was a stand-up version and a sit-down version. Right.
Yeah.
then they did the Return of the Jedi, like the top down thing where you race, had the speeder bike race and
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
The Atari 2600 stuff with the Empire Strikes Back game, I played a ton. I still love it.
Yeah.
That they did some of like the Jedi training, which was always awkward, and
Yeah.
but like Empire Strikes Back is an all timer.
Yeah. And like Shadows of the Empire was really good
Shadows
too.
of the Empire, absolutely right. And now that would have been like 96, 97. So a little bit outside of their original run. That would have been right around that. Cause I remember playing that as a senior in college. But,
I was trucking. I was trucking, and I bought what was the system that came
Nintendo
up?
64.
Yeah, I bought a Nintendo 64 and I was playing in the Walmart parking lot in Beardstown, Illinois after I unloaded pigs.
Oh, I've been to Beardstown.
Yeah, I unloaded pigs and I bought that.
Oh, I went to school at University of Illinois. So that's not terribly far. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, I physically rented from the Champaign video store a Nintendo 64 system to play.
Oh, really?
Yeah, to play Shadows of the Empire on. Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was good.
Oh, that's great. But yeah, so even if we dip into that era, right?
Yeah.
Shadows of the Empire. On PC, X-Wing was my jam. X-Wing was everything for me. I loved X-Wing and TIE Fighter. TIE Fighter was better. And then, X-Wing versus TIE Fighter and all that stuff. And Rebel Assault. There's so many great Star Wars games, even of that era. And G.I. Joe has had virtually nil. G.I. Joe had the G.I. Joe 2600 game, The Attack of Cobra, which was fun.
I don't remember. I really don't remember that game.
There was a giant cobra that moved across the screen horizontally, and it would drop missiles or bombs or whatever, and you had to protect. You were using the paddle, and you had to protect. You had to shield G.I. Joe guys as they ran from one Quonset hut to the other Quonset hut. And so you had to stop the little bomb blasts from hitting them. Two things problematic with that is my paddles sucked. Every paddle I've ever used has sucked. They lost so they were always erratic and whatever. They were harder to use. So it was always difficult to play that game. However, great box art, good game and all that stuff. But I think Empire Strikes Back is better. They did.
I remember the Empire Strikes Back game.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that was tough. And the AT-AT's head.
Yeah, you had to shoot under the AT-AT's chin.
Right,
to
under the
its
chin for
spot.
that glowing dot was the only way you could kill him because they didn't have like the way to tie the legs up at the time.
But then occasionally you would get the force and the music would kick in and then you go hyperdrive and kill everyone. Yeah, it's so good.
Right.
There was a PC game for G.I. Joe that I think was.
I don't know.
I think it was for like Commodore 64. It was neat, but certainly, it was neat. Certainly not a barn burner. Then there was an arcade game in the actual arcades, which was I think it was around 88, maybe.
Oh, for G.I. Joe?
Yeah, there was. It was like a top.
Really?
Yeah, it was like a top-down. I don't know how you would refer to this, but like it was like a forward runner, right? So your guy would always be running forward, and you'd be moving left or right to shoot cobras as they popped up.
Really?
Yeah, it was cool. I mean, it was fun. It was fun. It was cool.
Is it like Akari Warriors or something? But
yes, yes.
Okay,
but bigger. The characters were bigger than Akari Warriors, but yes,
really,
it's exactly that style. I forget it's like a runner style or something they call it.
Okay.
But I'll say this though, that game came out at the tail end of actual arcades. Arcades were dying by that point because home consoles, Nintendo had arrived. They did have a couple amazing Nintendo games. The first G.I. Joe Nintendo game was great. I think the Atlantis Factor is better.
I never played that.
Oh, they were fun. And
really?
you had a nice variety of Joes. You could choose which Joe you wanted to use on the mission. There was a good variety of enemies. It was a classic side scroller, but it had a map that you could choose like what base to go to next. Like it wasn't super linear. Like you could go, I want to stop these guys here. Then I want, and eventually leading up to so I really do like those NES games, but the Star Wars NES games are fabulous too. You got to relive the movies. I used to sit in my basement, and when the first Star Wars NES game came out, man, I was all over it for hours and hours, much longer than I played the G.I. Joe game. So I think
Shadows of the Empire was like my favorite.
Shadows is fabulous. I think
I used to always put it in like first person mode in the snow speeder.
Yeah.
Where you couldn't like see any of the stuff around. That was it would make my friends sick when they would watch you play it, but it was that was a cool.
Well, I finally bought a 64
Okay.
A couple years later when the Racer game came out, the Star Wars Pod Racer.
Oh, the Pod Racer, yeah.
Because say what you will about the Phantom Menace, that game when they let you plug both joysticks in to use both thumb controls to control each pod, like the engines on each pod.
Oh, I don't remember doing that.
Yeah, so that's how you like you could back off and steer that way. That was
Really?
great. That was really
Because
fun.
I have an N64 right now and with GoldenEye in it.
Oh,
but
GoldenEye.
Yeah, that was what I loved that game.
So I think that's a no-brainer for Star Wars.
Yeah.
So video games definitely goes to Star Wars. So now this last one, I think, is also a no-brainer. The music.
Oh, well, yeah, that's pretty easy.
Yeah. It's obviously Transformers. No. I love the G.I. Joe stuff. It's great. They expanded the song for the movie.
Right.
Freaking
the movie version is really good.
Oh, movie version is dynamite. But it's never won an Oscar.
Right.
Right.
It's not copied by everyone.
Yeah. So, I literally don't think we need to spend a lot of time.
No,
but it's definitely a category. It's really a category to consider.
Right.
So, with that, we are in a place I did not expect us to be. Do you want the final tally?
Yeah, let's hear the final tally.
Star Wars 5. G.I. Joe 6.
Oh, wow.
G.I. Joe beat Star Wars today.
Even with the tie, the one tie.
The tie. It's the tie. It's the tie. It's the vehicle construction.
Right.
It's the tie that broke the tie. The fact that they were both fabulous vehicles, both had different purposes at the time, and they both satisfied both purposes. For what they both had to do, they both did it. So that was the tie. That was the tiebreaker for G.I. Joe, because G.I. Joe snuck in there with basically being fabulous toys, even if they were a little more complicated and a little more brittle and all this stuff.
Yeah,
the sheer
they're definitely more complicated. That's
but the sheer design and variety and the imagination behind them, won out. And where Star Wars tried to do the offshoot toys that we were talking about, I think that was actually, for me, that was the big difference. Is when Star Wars tried to do the offshoot toys, no one cared. I had one of those. It was like a suction cup half probe droid thing, and it was the stupidest toy I've ever seen.
Oh.
Yeah. Meanwhile, G.I. Joe does the Pogo, and while it's dumb, very similar toy. While it's dumb, Pogo's awesome.
Yeah. I had the Pogo. That was cool. But it did fall apart easy.
So I'm shocked. I genuinely, Blaine, I am really surprised that the winner is G.I. Joe. I 100% thought it was going to just be probably like a 7-3 blow up for Star Wars.
Yeah. No, that's cool. I collect both, but I haven't bought any Star Wars stuff in a long time because I've been just concentrating on Joe stuff lately.
Sure. Well, listeners, what do you guys think? Do you think we were fair? Do you think we were fair judges here? Obviously, we're going to be a little biased because we both love G.I. Joe, but Blaine loves that was his first love with Star Wars, right, Blaine?
Yeah, first love with Star Wars, yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like we did as good a fair job, Blaine, of really getting into these subjects, and we're talking emotionally. We're not talking sales figures, we're not talking quantities.
Yeah, I would be interested to know about the quantity stuff, but
I think
I didn't look at that. I'm sure. I was curious. Like I was looking the other day. I'm like, I wonder how many G.I. Joe flags were created. How many did they put out in the marketplace?
Well, that's probably a knowable answer. But also, I don't know if you remember. Well, were you collecting G.I. Joe at the time when the flag was on the stands? Were you into G.I. Joe?
I was not. I don't remember ever seeing one for sale.
It was on the shelves forever because it was so big. Yeah, because it was so big and it was more expensive. My recollection is it was there. It sat on the top shelf of every Toys R Us everywhere for years because of those reasons. There were so many of us kids that were like, either we couldn't afford it, it was expensive, you had to wait for a holiday, or it was just
I looked it up, like with inflation, it would have been like $1,000 in today's money.
Yeah,
that's a lot to buy for a kid's
toy. Yeah, it was a lot. It was like $100, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it was
Like $103. The one I looked it up.
Yeah.
$103 like $1,000 now.
Yeah,
So,
completely. Like, there were a lot of reasons for that, but that toy sat on the shelves for a long time, which is really fun.
Yeah.
And I think that's why you kind of do see a lot of boxed flags. It's
yeah,
not hard
maybe.
to find one. It's just going to cost you a lot of money.
Yeah, it's going to cost you
Yeah.
$3,000
Yeah.
for a boxed one,
But they're there to be had.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, listeners, what do you think? Do you think we were fair? Do you agree with this? Reach out on social media. Let us know. Again, ping me at Joe on Joe Pod. You send me an email to joeandjoepod@gmail.com. It's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at Joe and Joe Pod. Let us know. Let's get this debate going. I'll run some polls and stuff on Twitter.
Yeah,
and we'll see if we can get a good conversation going on this.
Yeah, for sure.
It has been a real pleasure talking to you today, Blaine.
Yeah, thanks. You too, Joe.
I absolutely appreciate you coming on the show. It's nice to make a new friend.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for all your Star Wars insight, man. I really love what you brought to the table today.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks a lot.
Fabulous. And now you know that G.I. Joe beats Star Wars, and Joeing is half the battle.